Hi, my name's Dr. Joyce Alberts, clinical psychologist working in private practice based in North Canterbury, South Island, New Zealand. This is part of a series of videos that I am posting looking at the tragic death of John O'Keefe. He was a Boston police officer in the United States, and he was in a relationship with a woman called Karen Reid. The reason I'm looking into this case is that I got very interested in it when my daughter introduced me to the complexity of the police investigation at the time. I started to look into this case. I was interested in what was happening and why an investigation was being run the way it was. I did start doing my own research, and then I continued to watch a number of YouTubers as they covered the subsequent trial and investigation, interviewed people, various people, etc. So I point to, especially to attorney Melanie Little and her YouTube channel, and you'll find many videos, many hours of videos related to the death of John O'Keefe and the subsequent prosecution of his girlfriend, Karen Reid. Also, Emily D. Baker does wonderful breakdown and investigation, looks into it in depth, and has a really good commentary, as well as Peter Lagos, the lawyer and not to forget Brother Counsel. I really do recommend, if anyone's interested in watching or learning a bit more about the trials of Karen Reid, and these are ongoing to this day. But the reason I wanted to look into this, as I said, was I wanted to understand how a police investigation could be conducted the way it was, how a trial could be conducted the way it was, how a second trial could be conducted the way it was, and the dynamics and the relationships and the interactions between key players. In my introduction video, I did put up a diagram. I'm just going to share that now just to refresh. I've just redone this particular diagram. Trying to share this as I wanted to just explore again the complexity. So this is the diagram that I had previously. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger for you. So you can see here we've got some key players. We've got Michael Proctor, who's a Boston police officer. We've got John O'Keefe, who has passed away. We've got Karen Reid over here. She has a brother, her parents, John O'Keefe's parents. There's a brother, Paul, his sister and sister's partner passed away. John took over the care of his sister's children, so his niece and nephew. And then we have another key player down here. We've got Brian Albert and his wife, Nicole Albert. The green lines here are this green line with a double line with the bars that shows it's a very close friendship. You'll see the green line here, just a single green line. That means that it relates a relationship, an acquaintance maybe, but definitely a connection. And you can see that's from Michael Proctor to Chris Albert, and then a close relationship between Michael Proctor and Julie Albert. And I'll explain that as we go. Down here, you'll see we have a woman called Kerry Roberts, and she was a very close relationship, a good friend of John O'Keefe. In fact, they had apparently attended the school prom together when they were teenagers. Kerry Roberts is also very close with John O'Keefe's mother, and after the death of John O'Keefe, Kerry Roberts became friends with Jennifer McCabe. Okay, so I went through that in detail in a previous video. What I want to do today is again to continue to look into this. I have a refreshed diagram to show you. I'm also going to point to some videos that you can find under the trial channel. I'm going to show a bit of one of their videos today, I contacted the trial channel yesterday and I specifically asked permission to be able to share their videos and to use selected clips. And the trial channel generously said they were very pleased to give me that permission and encourage me to in the postings that I'm doing, and said that they would look into what I'm sharing and hopefully give me some feedback as well. So let's go back to the 29th of January 2022. In the early hours of the morning, John O'Keefe's body was found on the front lawn of Brian Albert's property. Brian Albert being a sergeant in the Boston Police Department, as John O'Keefe was also a Boston police officer. The John O'Keefe's body was found by Karen Reid, Kerry Roberts, and Jennifer McCabe. The suggestion that Karen Reid was responsible for John O'Keefe's death appears to have come specifically from statements that Jennifer McCabe made that morning as she was interviewed by the police. So I want to just stress that again. It is my opinion and my understanding from reading various documents, watching elements of both trials, the 2024 trial of Karen Reid and then the 2025 trial of Karen Reid, that the accusation that Karen Reid was responsible for John O'Keefe's death came from Jennifer McCabe. So remember, Jennifer McCabe is a close friend of John O'Keefe. Jennifer McCabe met John O'Keefe through her daughter and John O'Keefe's niece, who had become friends. Kerry Roberts, as I said, knew John O'Keefe as they went through high school, and in fact they had attended the prom together and remained friends. But it wasn't until that morning of the 29th of January 2022 that a friendship between Kerry Roberts and Jennifer McCabe began. So again, I just want to stress, these are my opinions. This is information that I've obtained through watching various videos, but also following the trials and reading documents and interviews that various people have had with different law enforcement groups during the investigation from 2022 right up until recently. As I said, if you go to the trial channel, you will find an extensive list of videos following both trials and breaking down different aspects by just watching as different key players are giving evidence and are being cross-examined. So if we go back to that morning of January 29th of January 2022, Karen Reid realises in the morning that John O'Keefe isn't in his home. She was staying the night at John O'Keefe's place. She becomes frantic. She reaches out to Kerry Roberts, John O'Keefe's friend, and she also reaches out to Jennifer McCabe, who is John O'Keefe's friend. In fact, she had to get Jennifer McCabe's phone number through John O'Keefe's niece. So there was no direct friendship or contact between Karen Reid and Jennifer McCabe. That contact came through the friendship with John O'Keefe. So Kerry Reid leaves John O'Keefe's residence in the early hours of the morning. She drives in her Lexus SUV to Jennifer McCabe's place. She is distraught. She's at times hysterical, and she's very, very upset. They then make their way to, actually, I'll just hold on. I'm not sure whether they made their way to Kerry Roberts, but anyway, Kerry Roberts follows Jennifer McCabe and Karen Reid in Karen's Lexus to return to John O'Keefe's home. Now, the suggestion to return to John O'Keefe's home to look for John O'Keefe came from Jennifer McCabe. Jennifer McCabe said in her evidence in both trials that on arrival at her home, Karen Reid was hysterical and was making statements that she had hit John O'Keefe with her vehicle, that her tail light was broken, um, and she didn't know where he was. So it's interesting that Karen Reid had come from John O'Keefe's home, was saying, I don't know where he is, and then Jennifer McCabe directs him to go back to the home. It's really confusing. I don't understand what the thinking there was. And again, I said this in my first video, but what's also interesting is that there's clear video footage of Karen Reid, Jennifer McCabe, and Kerry Roberts arriving back at John O'Keefe's home. You will see Karen Reid's Lexus pull up clearly in the ring camera footage, and all three individuals enter the home. But what is missing is the ring footage, or the camera footage of Karen Reid arriving back at John O'Keefe's home around approximately 12:30, 12:36 a.m. after she had dropped John O'Keefe off at Brian Albert's home. So a quick reminder that Brian Albert and his wife Nicole had invited a number of people back to their property around midnight on the 29th of 28th of January, as the bar that they were socialising in was closing at midnight. So a number of people were at that bar, including Karen Reid and John O'Keefe, Brian Albert and his wife Nicole, Brian's close friend Brian Higgins, who is a alcohol, tobacco and firearms officer, as well as Jennifer McCabe and her husband Matt McCabe. So a number of people moved from the bar The Waterfall, which is in Kenton, and they go to 34 Fairview, which is the home of Brian Albert. Karen Reid drops John off there. They arrive at the property. Karen, as I said, was feeling unwell. She was discomfort due to her health concerns, and she was also unsure whether the invitation included them. It appears that the invitation was sort of broadly said, generally said, like, hey, people, come back to our place. So Karen didn't know these people. She didn't know Brian and his wife, Nicole. She knew of Jennifer McCabe and her husband, Matt. But again, these were not her close friends. She did not know them or socialise them. She did know Brian Higgins because he was also a friend of John O'Keefe and had come to John O'Keefe's home at various times to watch different sporting events. So, in fact, they did not know, John and Karen did not know Brian Albert and his wife closely, that they even had to ask for the address. So this wasn't a home that they were familiar with. These were people that they would normally socialise with. So according to Karen, John O'Keefe enters the home and does not come out. According to Jennifer McCabe, again, remember, this is her close friend, John. She is watching from inside the home and sees Karen's Lexus pull up. Jennifer says that she's watching and she sees the Lexus move, drives forward and then reverses and then leaves. So according to Jennifer McCabe, John never gets out of the Lexus. However, she's been in contact with John, giving the directions to Brian's home and even asking, are you coming in? Yet she does not go outside to see what's happening as this Lexus stops, moves, and is there for a period of time. It was snowing, but not heavily snowing. Likewise, Brian Higgins, this is his friend John. He's seen him at the waterfall. And he even messages him, like, you coming in? But again, he doesn't go outside to say, look, hey, come in, guys. You're welcome to join us as well. So according to all of the people inside the Albert home, John O'Keefe never enters the home. It is Karen who says that John gets out of the Lexus and she sees him enter the home. And in fact, another vehicle arrives while Karen is waiting. And this vehicle is driven by the brother of one of the teenagers that was inside the house, or young adult. So that the driver of the second vehicle, his sister comes out to let her brother know that she's going to stay for a little bit longer, and so he doesn't have to pick her up. So the driver of that second vehicle and his then girlfriend gave evidence and have both said that they could clearly see that there was only one occupant in the Lexus, and that was the driver. They clearly could see Karen Reid sitting in the driver's seat of the Lexus, and John O'Keefe was not in the Lexus. So there does seem to be evidence from other people who are not connected to the Albert family, not connected to Jennifer McCabe, not connected to Brian Higgins, that Karen was alone in her Lexus parked in front of the Albert home, thus corroborating what Karen Reid has claimed. When I say claimed, she has given various interviews, which you could watch, but she herself has yet to give evidence to be cross-examined. And there's some hope that she may be able to have that opportunity. So remember, in all legal cases, as it is here in New Zealand, the presumption of innocence is held to the defendant until proven guilty. And in Karen Reid's case, she's gone through 2 criminal trials. The first one, the jury was not able to reach a unanimous decision. There's a lot of controversy over that, with some jurors saying, well, actually, they did reach unanimous decision that she was not guilty of murder. It was another lesser charge that they were not able to come to an agreement on. So there's some controversy over that. Despite that, that jury were not able to find her guilty, and that's important. So a second trial was conducted in 2025, and in that case, that jury unanimously found she was not guilty. She was not guilty of murder. She was not guilty of manslaughter. The only thing that jury found her guilty of was driving over the limit due to the amount of alcohol she had consumed during the evening. I do have to say, though, that there is controversy even around that finding, and maybe that will be cleared up in one of the civil cases. So let's go back to that early hours of the morning. So they return to John O'Keefe's home. As I said, video footage shows that. They then leave John O'Keefe's. So this is Karen Reid, Kerry Roberts, and Jennifer McCabe. And finally, at Karen's request and insistence, they make their way to 34th Fairview Road, the home of Brian and Nicole Albert. They are now in Kerry Roberts' vehicle, and they arrive at 34 Fairview Road in Kerry Roberts' vehicle. By this time, it is beginning to snow heavily. It starts snowing heavily from about 6 a.m. onwards. It is quite clear on the video footage when they leave John's home that, and when they arrive and when they leave, that no time do any of the women, Kerry, Jennifer, or Karen, spend time standing at the rear of Karen's Lexus. Now, this is in contradiction to Jennifer McCabe's statements that she has made under oath, that Karen Reid was pointing out, look, my taillight's broken. There's pieces of taillight missing. And that, according to Jennifer McCabe, occurred at John O'Keefe's. However, the footage does not back up her claims. So anyway, they arrive at 34 Fairview, and Karen is distraught. She's looking for John. She's wondering what's happened to him. Has he had an accident? Has he slipped and fallen? She's even thinking, because there's snow plows, could he have been struck by a snow plow? Was he trying to walk? She has no idea what's happened to her boyfriend. But as they arrive, she can clearly see a large shape on the front lawn. So if anyone has been in snow conditions, you know that more snow settles, it actually becomes quite bright, and if lights from a vehicle shine onto snow, it almost eliminates the whole area. I remember we had quite a heavy snowfall over on Banks Peninsula here in New Zealand. Um, we have a property there. It's surrounded by trees. There's a small grass area. We had a vehicle parked there, and I was inside. It was early hours in the morning, and the whole front yard was lighting up. There was this flashing red light, and it was really illuminating the entire front yard. So I went to the kitchen window to try to work out where's this flashing light. I even woke up my husband and said, look, there's some sort of, light, this red light. It's really bright and it's lighting up the whole yard. And it was a tiny little red warning light in in our vehicle that was to do with the alarm. So it was indicating that the vehicle's car alarm was activated, and this light would flash. So if anyone's been in that snow condition and there's a decent amount of snow cover, any light illuminates. So Karen clearly sees a body. She sees a body and she recognizes that this is John O'Keefe. Goes rushing over to him. So this is where it really starts to get bizarre. So Jen McCabe makes the 911 call. Remember, this is her good friend, her close friend. This is her friend, John O'Keefe. He's a police officer, and she knows that. Her brother and wife are in the house. And in fact, their bedroom was in a very, very close proximity to where John's body was lying, where they found him. And remember, now there's car lights. There's at least one set of car lights there, and that's Kerry Roberts' vehicle. Jen makes this phone call, and she says to the 911 person, there's a body in the snow. There's a guy passed out in the snow. Because Jen makes 2 911 calls. In neither 111 call does she identify that it is John. She doesn't give his first name or last name. She doesn't inform the person taking the 911 call that this is a police officer, a fallen police officer. She doesn't alert that it's on the property of another police officer. And Brian acknowledges that he is qualified as a first responder. First responder in the United States is like one of our medics or paramedics that can provide CPR, medical assistance. That information is not relayed. And many others have said if Jennifer McCabe had said this is a police officer, the 911 response would have been different. This would have sent a huge number of police immediately to this. Instead, she says, there's a guy passed out in the snow. Interesting that you describe your friend that way. At one point, I understand it was on the second 911 call, Jennifer's asked, does anybody know how to do CPR? Is anyone doing CPR? And she says, no one knows how to do CPR. Well, Kerry Roberts does. Kerry Roberts testified that not only does she know how to do CPR, she was attempting to do CPR. Jen McCabe would know that Brian Alberts, as a first responder, would know how to do CPR. Jennifer McCabe herself coaches basketball. She's involved in sports. I find it very hard to believe that she would not have some degree of first aid training in her role as a sports coach, and that she herself may also have done CPR. And at later point, she says she was helping out. So Karen is the first one to initiate CPR. But remember, Karen's hysterical. This is her boyfriend, and it becomes clear very early on that really he has passed away, but they're still attempting to. still attempting to revive him. And you know that if a person's been out in the cold, they may appear as if they have passed away, but they may still be able to be revived. So we know that in those cold water drownings, that you will first bring the body temperature, the core temperature up, and then you will then the medical professionals will decide whether the person has deceased or not. So they will not make that finding when the core temperature is too low. They will bring the core temperature up to normal body temperature and then decide whether the person has passed away. So I have a document that I put together. This is a good year or so ago, as I started to have questions. And this was after the first trial and while the second trial was going and underway. And I've got a couple of pictures that I will show you as to just how mind-blowing this whole investigation and the trial was. So my first question is, why did Jen McCabe not tell the 911 operator that, number one, John is a police officer, i.e., as I said, officer down, and B, why did she not give his name? Why did she say there's a guy? And why did she say no one knew how to do CPR when her brother-in-law, Brian Albert, was meters away? Brian Albert never comes out of the house, even when there are numerous emergency vehicles. There are fire engines, ambulances with their lights flashing, people talking on the front lawn. And again, if you've been in any snow events, the sound attenuates. It becomes very loud, very quickly, bright with the lights flashing. It just beggars belief that Brian Albert says that he slept through all of this. He didn't come out of his house to investigate what's going on his front lawn. My second question, this comes from evidence from the trials. Why would Brian Albert not lock his front door? Jen McCabe claimed that as John O'Keefe was being transferred to the hospital, she goes running into the house when the police finally ask her, is there anybody in the house? Who's in the house? And she goes in to check on her brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and she states that the front door was unlocked. Nicole Albert also said under oath that they would often leave the front door unlocked. In fact, it was not locked because they had teenage kids, and often they would go out, come home late at night, and it would be a hassle if the door was locked because they would lose their keys and then they'd have to change the lock. So they just over time just gave up and no longer locked the front door. Are you serious? Brian Albert is a sergeant in the police, and he's been involved in tracking down fugitives. I don't know any police officer that doesn't have quite a high level of security for their own home, for their own family. But however, apparently the door was left unlocked. It's my personal opinion. It was left unlocked because hadn't been long since somebody had from inside the house had been outside on that front lawn and returned inside the house, and maybe didn't have enough time to lock it because other people were arriving. I know that's speculation, but that would make sense, wouldn't it? Rather than we just don't lock the door. It's unlocked all the time in the middle of Kenton. Okay, now my third question. So the Alberts, Brian and Nicole, had a dog. It was a mixed breed. It's often been described as a German Shepherd, but apparently it was the Belgian Shepherd mix. And the Belgian Shepherds seem to be the preferred police dog in the United States for a variety of reasons. So this dog that they'd had for over 7 years, long time, and pets, any of us who have pets know, or dogs, know that they're not just your pet, they become your fur baby, they become part of the family. So their dog Chloe, according to Brian and Nicole, would sleep in their room. either on the mat near the bed or, as Brian said, sometimes in the closet. I assume it's like a large walk-in type wardrobe, maybe doesn't have a door, maybe it has a sliding door, I don't know, but he does say sometimes she sleeps in the closet. This dog, Chloe, was known to bark at strangers. So Brian is asked and Nicole is asked, well, given what's known about your dog, Chloe, and with all of the commotion going on outside that morning, about 6:40 a.m., how come Chloe's not barking? Where was Chloe? And it, again, just does not make logical sense that this dog is not barking. And again, the assumption is, or speculation is, not just from myself, but it is my opinion, and again could account for why this front door was unlocked at that time, was that Chloe had already been removed from the Albert home. Chloe had been taken away and, as Nicole said, and rehomed. So Brian and Nicole get rid of Chloe, and that will become important later. And this is another question. Why did the Alberts, why did Brian and Nicole have the floor in the garage replaced? This is in the weeks and months after the John O'Keefe's death. Why did they need to replace some of the flooring? Not all of the flooring, but some of the flooring in the garage. And then why did they sell that home, 34 Fairview Road, for less than what it was worth, less than the valuation, within months of his death? So the morning of John O'Keefe's death, Chloe's gone. No barking. This is a dog that's known to bark. Nobody hears this dog barking. It's a small front yard. It's not a huge property. And noise would carry. And this is a dog who's known to bark at strangers. So Chloe's gone that morning. Then they replace some of the floor in the garage. So the garage is slightly below, it's almost, in New Zealand we call it split level. So the garage, then you have the ground floor above the garage, and because the garage is sunken, you would drive down the driveway to get to the garage, but you'd walk up the path to get in the house. And then the story above that is the sleeping quarters. And if I get to my head like this, the bedroom of Nicole and Brian here, and John O'Keefe's body here. So not a huge distance away. And you can see that on various diagrams. In fact, there's another YouTube channel that I would point you to, and that's Microdots. Microdots uses AI and puts together these amazing videos, but these videos are largely based on facts, documented information that's come from investigations or the trials, but there is a take on it from Microdots' own personal opinion, shaped and formed by this information. So really helpful to have a look at Microdots. But let me just share with you, let me take you to the opening statements of the defence. I want to go here. Yeah. Let me just see if I can move that there, get to the right screen. And let's go back to share. Here we go. Now, I am sharing up here. Here we go. Okay. So as you can see, I've got my YouTube channel open here. You see if I take it full screen. This is the trial channel, and you will see here if I scroll down, there are numerous videos, some of them longer videos, and these are videos of the first trial. So I've opened up the first trial for you to watch. Now, the prosecutor here for the Commonwealth in New Zealand we would say for the Crown Solicitor, is just finishing his opening statements, and he's leaving the podium. And his opening statements go for 37 minutes. Sitting in the background here, you will see in green and white, this is John O'Keefe's mother, Peggy. This gentleman here is David Giannetti. Sitting next to David Giannetti is Karen Reid. Sitting next to Karen Reid is Alan Jackson, defense lawyer from California. And next to Alan Jackson is Elizabeth Little, who is a solicitor who also works in the same firm as Alan Jackson. So David Giannetti is about to stand up and give his opening statements. I'm going to go full screen on this one here, and then I'm going to push. If I can we play? That going to play? Why is that not playing? It just went back a bit. Let me maybe escape full screen so I can push play. This is the first time I've tried to do this on YouTube. I am using
Mr. Tonelli, Mr. Penny.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court.
This is David Giannetti coming to give his opening statements. So David Giannetti for the defense.
Karen Reid was framed. Her car never struck John O'Keefe. She did not cause his death. And that means that somebody else did. You will learn that it was no accident that John O'Keefe was found dead on the front lawn of 34th Fairview Road in Canton on January 29, 2020. You will learn that at that address lived a well-known and well-connected law enforcement family in Canton, the Alberts. Because the Alberts were involved, and because they had close connections to the investigators in this case, Karen Reid was framed for a murder she did not commit. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. As I previously told you, my name is David Giannetti. I'm an attorney with an office in Boston. Together with attorneys Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little, it's truly my privilege and my honor to represent Karen Reid during this trial. From a very early juncture in this case, you will question the Commonwealth's theory of the case. You will question the quality of the Commonwealth's evidence. You will question the veracity of the Commonwealth's witnesses. And you will question their shoddy and biased investigation, a faulty investigation that led to Karen Reid sitting here today. You will learn, in short, that the police did no real investigation of this case, and you will question why. You will question why the investigators had such tunnel vision. You will question why they focused solely on Karen Reid, someone with no ties to the Canton Police Department, as opposed to the well-known and well-connected Albert family of Canton, family that was never treated as suspects by the investigators in this case. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found mortally injured on Brian Albert's front lawn. His body was in full view and almost right below Brian Albert's bedroom window on his front lawn. He was found wearing only one sneaker. You'll learn that Brian Albert was a Boston police officer as well, and that he was a trained first responder. Brian Albert was notified that another police officer was injured and unresponsive on his front lawn, and Brian Albert did nothing. His sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, and other civilians were on his property that morning after John O'Keefe's body was found. Police, EMTs, firefighters, police cruisers, and ambulance, fire truck, lights flashing, and first responder Brian Albert never came out of his house. Equally important to you will be the fact that the lead homicide investigators never went inside the Albert home that day. You'll learn that Brian Albert's brother, Kevin Albert, is a Canton police officer. It was obvious very early on that the Canton police should not be investigating the death of a man found on the property of the brother of a Canton police officer. So it was decided just about from the start that the Massachusetts State Police should take complete control of this investigation because the Canton police were conflicted out. Now, that sounded good at the time, but you'll learn that two major problems arose. First, despite the fact that they obviously had a conflict of interest, the evidence will show that the Canton police still had their hands in this investigation. You will find it astounding. But Canton police officer Kevin Albert, the reason for the conflict of interest in the first place, was continually updated about the status of this investigation while it was going on. Second, and equally troubling, is that the lead state police detective who was assigned to this case was a man named Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor, you will learn, one of the many people in Canton with deep ties to the Albert family. Michael Proctor's own mother refers to the Alberts as the Proctor's second family. At his own sister's wedding, Michael Proctor was in a wedding party with Colin Albert. And he sat at the head table that wedding with members of the Albert family. That's the man who was chosen to lead the investigation into the suspicious death on the property of Brian Albert. That's the man who gave updates to Canton police officer Kevin Albert while the state police were supposed to be investigating what had occurred at his brother Brian Albert's house. You'll learn that right from the jump, Michael Proctor predetermined the outcome of this case. Never stepped foot inside the Albert home on January 29, 2022. Never checked out whether there were any signs of struggle inside that home. He never called for crime scene technicians and other specialists to look for blood or other trace evidence within the home. He never asked Brian Albert for permission to go in the home and take a look around. Michael Proctor never applied for a search warrant to go in that home. Instead, he focused immediately and exclusively on Karen Reed, the outsider. You will learn that no one in the Proctor family has ever called the Reed family their second family. No one in the Proctor family had been in a wedding party with anyone from the Reed family. Karen Reed was a convenient outsider. She was most definitely not a candidate. So how did Michael Proctor feel about her? How did he treat somebody he was investigating at a point in time when he should have been keeping an open mind, focusing on obtaining all possible evidence so that he didn't miss anything? Well, you will learn that on the very day that John O'Keefe was found dead on Brian Albert's lawn, Michael Proctor was texting with his high school buddies about this supposedly secret investigation using his personal cell phone. He was revealing information about this investigation to his friends, assuming that nobody would ever find out what he was doing and what he was saying. He was revealing his true thoughts about Karen Reed to his friends, not being put in his sanitized police, his true feelings to his friends whom he trusted, and in text messages that he never thought would come into the hands of the defense teams. Lead investigator Trooper Michael Proctor, right from the start, called Karen Reed names would reserve only for your worst enemies. He told his friends that he hoped that she would kill herself. He told his friends that he had seized her cell phone. And you will learn that he knew he shouldn't have been accessing any content on her cell phone because he knew there would likely be attorney-client communications between Karen and me at that time. He knew that he was supposed to wait for a search warrant or other permission from a judge in order to go through that phone. But you'll learn that he went through the phone anyway, without permission. And you'll know that he did because he told his high school buddies that he was searching her phone for nude photos of Karen Reed. He was disappointed he hadn't found them yet. That is the professional and unbiased investigator who was chosen to lead the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. You will learn that one of Michael Proctor's high school friends commented to him that with a dead body on the front lawn, the homeowner in this case is surely going to catch a lot of grief. And you know what Michael Proctor's response to that was? One word. Nope. He explained why. Michael Proctor assured his buddies that the homeowner would not catch a lot of grief because, quote, the homeowner's a Boston cop too. And that one sentence, ladies and gentlemen, in Michael Proctor's own words, will explain a lot to you about how this investigation was conducted. You will be able to evaluate whether Trooper Michael Proctor treated Brian Albert and his family differently because of who they are and their relationships between his family and theirs. You will evaluate whether this investigation was on the up and up. You will decide, as a result, how valuable or worthless the prosecution's DNA evidence is or is not, in light of who controlled that evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor's fingerprints are figuratively all over this case. His fingerprints are all over the Commonwealth's evidence. You will learn that Michael Proctor showed up at Karen Reed's parents' house in Dayton to interview her during the afternoon of January 29th, only hours after John O'Keefe's body was found dead on Brian Albert's front lawn. You'll learn that Michael Proctor had her Lexus SUV towed from her parents' home. But you'll also learn that he wrote a search warrant in which he falsified the crime that he found that. He swore under oath that the vehicle wasn't towed until 5:30 p.m. You'll learn that we obtained surveillance footage that he didn't know we would get. And that surveillance footage exposed Michael Proctor's words in that sworn affidavit were a lie. Michael Proctor had that vehicle for about 90 minutes before he claimed to have taken it. And folks, you will learn that the timing is important, very important. Because when John O'Keefe was first found on Brian Albert's front lawn, the police thoroughly searched that yard for potential evidence. And it wasn't just one officer, or two, or three. There were at least 4 officers that searched that front lawn. And that morning was the beginning of the snowstorm, but there wasn't yet much snow on the ground when they were searching that morning. It was light out by the time they did the search, and it was getting lighter. And during that thorough search of Brian Albert's front lawn, the number of pieces of taillight that were found by a minimum of 4 officers looking for evidence was 0. It was only later in the day, when the snow was really starting to accumulate, that the police miraculously started to find pieces of taillight on the property. The police only started to find pieces of taillight after Michael Proctor had seized Karen Reed's car. They were starting to find pieces of taillight Michael Proctor had possession of the taillight. You'll learn that Trooper Michael Proctor then kept going back to the Albert residence after that day, and he claims to have kept finding pieces of taillight on multiple occasions on multiple different days. In addition, a good week after John O'Keefe's death, Canton Police Chief Kenneth Berkowitz an older officer on the brink of retirement with probably not the best eyesight. Someone, he supposedly was driving, happened to be driving past Brian Albert's house. And by the way,
Right, I'm going to pause that there and stop sharing. Go back to full screen. I'm just wondering if anybody who is watching this is shocked at what you just heard in those opening statements. Where have I just gone? I cannot find myself. I must be here somewhere. Where did I go? Maybe I should practice this a bit more first. Okay, so I stopped during the opening statements of David Unetti, and this is the opening statements of the first trial, the 2024 trial. In there you'll hear, as I said, about the close relationship and conflicts of interest that were between the Canton Police Department and the Boston Police Department, and therefore another law enforcement agency such as Massachusetts State Police may have been a better option. So the conflicts of interest are that, first of all, Brian Albert is a Boston police officer, as is John O'Keefe. So that's your first one. So having members of your own police force then investigate the death of one of their members and who's found on the property of another Boston police officer, that to me, I'm no legal expert, I'm no law enforcement expert, but just as a human being, I'm going, well, surely there's got to be a conflict there. The next one, of course, is that Kevin Albert was a detective in the Canton Police Department, so therefore the Canton Police Department could not do that investigation. In fact, they had started initially. They were the first law enforcement to arrive on scene, but then they did recuse themselves and say, well, actually, we can't investigate this. And that's when the Boston Police Department and Michael Proctor, as the lead investigator, took over. However, the Canton Police did not completely recuse themselves. They remained involved. So, for example, Brian Higgins, who was present at the time, potentially could have been a suspect because he was at the home and he was there, interacted with John O'Keefe before his death. In fact, sent him a text message. So logic would say, well, you'd want to interview Brian Higgins. Brian Higgins had an office in the Canton Police Department. Kevin Albert also acted in some ways as a liaison between some of the members of his own family and Michael Proctor. And as you heard David Unetti say, he was receiving updates. That Brian's his brother and is also a police officer. And, again, logic would say that they were talking, sharing information. Another point of conflict of interest was the relationship between Michael Proctor and the Alberts, and in particular, Julie Albert, who is the sister-in-law of Brian Albert. So, as I've said in my other video, the three brothers that are key players in this case, in the death of John O'Keefe, are Kevin Albert. He was not present. There's no assertion there that he had anything directly to do with John O'Keefe's death. He was not part of the group that was socialising at the Waterfall bar. He was not present at Brian's home when John O'Keefe was killed. But he had his hands in this investigation. Then Brian Albert, of course, because of being a police officer, it was his home, and he did nothing, as you heard David Unetti say. Didn't come out of the house, didn't investigate, didn't even stick his head out the window to see, or open the curtain and say, what the heck is going on in my front yard? All these fire engines and sirens and ambulances and people talking. At one point, Karen Reid's running around hysterically screaming. before John O'Keefe was removed. Brian Albert shows no interest. And then, of course, Chris Albert, who's the brother of Brian. The conflict there is that Michael Proctor's sister, Courtney, had a close relationship with Julie's sister, Gillian, and through that, Julie became direct friends with Courtney, and for 9 years provided childcare for Courtney Proctor. And on one occasion, at least, the suggestion is that she also provided childcare for Michael Proctor and his wife when they were let down. So there's all these close relationships. And if I go now to myself over here again, so I don't lose myself again, I will pull up my updated genogram. So just waiting for that to come up, and then I will share. So what I did with this updated one, things have been moved around a little bit from my earlier ones. I've corrected some mistakes that I had in terms of spelling errors, etc. So we've got Karen Reid here, and you would have seen Karen Reid, the camera focused in on her face at one point during David Unetti's opening statements. So Karen Reid was girlfriend of John at the time of his death. She knew of Kerry Roberts, she knew of Jen McCabe, but she wasn't their direct friends. So what I've done here to sort of illustrate this, so the red zigzaggy line here, it shows a hostile connection. So if I go on to Dad O'Keefe here, I can show you how I can do this. So Dad O'Keefe, show an emotional bond, hostile towards Karen Reid. I'm not saying that Dad O'Keefe, so I've got Dad O'Keefe. Yeah, that's Dad O'Keefe. I'm not saying he is, but it is quite clear that Mum O'Keefe is. Now we've got all of these red lines all focusing on Karen Reid. Kerry Roberts becomes hostile to Karen Reid. Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe. We've got Karen now disconnected. She'd been close to John's niece and nephew, had taken part for a number of years in caring for them, would do fun things with John's niece, such as taking her to get her nails done, treating her at Starbucks, etc. But she's now estranged from those two children who she had, for a period of time, been in a very close relationship with them. As I said, after the death of John, Kerry Roberts and Jen McCabe become close friends. And in fact, it's not quite obvious here on my diagram, but I almost would like to put Jen McCabe at the centre of all of this. She really becomes the hub of what's going on here. She's a major player in all of this. If I go over to this side of the diagram here and scroll in. So we've got Brian Albert and his sister, Brian Albert and his wife, Nicole, hostile towards Karen Reid, but they've got these close relationships. So Brian Albert is good friends with Brian Higgins. This is annoying. This really is getting a bit annoying. In the way I can't zoom in and zoom out as I would like to. See if this works. So I've got Brian Higgins down here. So good friends of Brian Albert and had been a good friend of John O'Keefe. We've got Jen McCabe. Her daughter had been good friends with John's niece, and that was how Jen and John became friends, and then likewise with Jen's husband, Matt. We've got, as I said, Detective Kevin Albert. He has a connection with Michael Proctor, and that's again through Michael Proctor's sister, Courtney Alberg, and her relationship with Gillian, and then through to Julie Roberts. Down here, I've got Mrs. Proctor, so this is Michael's mother. Remember, she asserts that the Alberts, and I'm not sure whether she's referring just to Chris Albert, Julie Albert, but the Albert family is their second family. So we see all of these green connections on this side of my diagram, and all of the hostility now directed towards Karen Reid. So if you want to go back and watch the remainder of David Giannetti's opening statements, I think you would find that really helpful. I chose not to torture you by showing the Commonwealth's opening statement, as their prosecutor at the time, their attorney, Larry, has such a dry, monotone voice, and during the first trial basically brings as witnesses every single person, first responder, police officer who attended the call out to 34 Fairview Road. Now you might say, well, that's a good thing to do, bring them all, examine them all, they can be cross-examined, their evidence now is documented. But it just was painful, really painful. So you can take that as your trigger warning. You can watch it if you want. What I do want to do and endeavour to do, and I might practice this, is I want to compare the defence opening statements in the first trial with the opening statements in the second trial. And then likewise, I want to do the closing statements in the first trial with the closing statements in the second trial. And I do have a rationale for that, is to show you the difference, the different approach, but also the consistency. A lot of difference between the Commonwealth's case and presentation from trial 1 to trial 2. And in fact, in trial 2, you'll see they bring in a special prosecutor, Hank Brennan, who's a completely different style from the prosecutor in the first trial. Alan Jackson takes more of a lead in the second trial, and then that was a strategic. He's a bit more of a, shall we say, a showman as a lawyer, as a solicitor, but does David Giannetti, Alan Jackson, Elizabeth Little, and then later Bob Giannetti, I've got that right, I'll double check that, joins the team, and they are such a strong defence team. Now, the reason that I am going to focus on the defence team is the evidence the defence team brought is backed up. And I'm going to make a statement here. And I have permission to use this statement because this isn't my saying. I heard it from a woman, Michelle. I'll find her details for you. A wonderful presenter. And she made the statement, which I'm now going to claim, and she gave me permission to, which is my SAS has citations. And I think that would sum up David Giannetti and Alan Jackson and Elizabeth Little when they make statements. When you hear their SAS come out during their cross-examination, it's because they have citations. They can back up everything they say and claim. When they bring evidence, it is backed up. In contrast, and this may surprise you and in fact make your head pop off, the opposite is not the true for the prosecution. Their evidence lacks citations. The evidence was weak. The evidence was shown time and time again in trial 1 and trial 2 to be undermined, to not be the evidence they claim it to be. And that may really surprise you, and of course it surprised me watching this and made me go, yeah. So let me give you an example. The red solo cups. Does anyone know what a red solo cup is? Well, it's a plastic cup seen in America often at barbecues, outdoor events, student events, typically for drinking alcohol and beer cup. So let's set the scene again. John O'Keefe is found deceased on the lawn of Brian Albert's property. There's quite a bit of snow. The snow began falling very heavily from about 6 a.m. onwards. Up until then, it was a light snowfall. And John O'Keefe had a significant wound to the back of his head, and it's the wound to the back of his head, the traumatic blunt force trauma that caused a traumatic brain injury that very quickly would have led to his death. So, the first police to arrive, Brian Gallagher, who was on scene, instead of calling out the forensic team to do the investigation, secure the scene. There's no securing of the scene. So the first two things, Brian Gallagher says, I've got a brilliant idea. We've got all this snow. Let's get a leaf blower to blow the snow away so we can expose the blood evidence, so we can collect the blood evidence and any other evidence there. So let's get this leaf blower, which is a petrol powered or a two-stroke powered vehicle. It's not vehicle, what am I trying to say? A piece of machinery that you might use to clear your yard of leaves. And apparently it was good for blowing away snow. So he was so impressed with himself for coming up with this innovative way of finding evidence in a potential homicide scene that he videos. There is video of him using the snowblower to blow away snow. Would that not potentially contaminate any evidence that you collect because of moving things, but also you're blowing the fumes of a two-stroke or a petrol-powered piece of machinery? Could that not contaminate? The second next brilliant idea. Brian Gallagher's now retired, thank goodness. In fact, a lot of these police officers are retired, resigned, sacked, redeployed, reassigned, disciplined in some way, and not surprisingly. So Brian Gallagher's retired. First brilliant idea, let's use a leaf blower. Second brilliant idea, red Solo cups to scoop up the blood and the snow from the scene. Okay, you might think, okay, well, it's a reasonable container to use as long as it's secured in an evidence bag so that it could not be cross-contaminated. What's your problem, Joyce? Isn't that a good way to do things? Well, you possibly could argue if it's secured in the evidence bag or sealed in some way, but these Solo cups weren't sealed. They're open Solo cups, scooping up the snow with blood evidence, possible DNA evidence, other evidence possibly, in the cup. The cup is placed in a paper shopping bag, type of shopping bag that you would get from a supermarket. It's a brown paper bag. The cups are placed in there, open, in the shopping bag. That is transported to the Canton Police Department. Yes, the very police department that should not be part of this investigation, where Karen Reid's Lexus is now housed in the Sally Port or the garage. And the unsecured Solo cups in the brown paper bag are placed on the floor at the rear of Karen's Lexus and left there for a period of time. They're open and exposed. People are walking past. I'm sure if there's any crime investigator watching this or forensic scientist, they're going, what? Oh, the potential for cross-examination is huge. How can you rely on that evidence? And this is why I'm saying the defense bring SAS to their case because their SAS has citations. The prosecution cannot do the same. Their evidence is suspect. In fact, very sus. Okay, I think I've gone on enough to begin with to introduce the opening statements from trial one. I am going to continue to ramble on and rant on about this in other videos. I hope that what is made clear in these first two videos is the degree of connections and relationships between the Boston police force and the Canton police force, and how this investigation was tainted and biased from the outset because of the relationships between Michael Proctor and members of the Albert family and Brian Higgins and his ability to access the Canton Police Department, where he has an office, where evidence, including John O'Keefe's clothing, including the blood evidence, the solo cups, including the Lexus, are taken to. And in fact, there is evidence of Brian Higgins in the garage area where Karen reads Lexus. Sorry, Karen, giving you the Lexus surname, where her vehicle is impounded, where the police seized her vehicle under a search warrant on the day of the death of John O'Keefe and placed it in the Canton Police Department, not Boston Police Department, not Massachusetts State Police Department, or any other police department. The Dighton Police Department, you might have heard that mentioned in David Unetti's opening, but it was placed in the Canton Police Department. So at the beginning, I said the reason I'm looking into this and I've been following this and diving into it, I'm wanting to understand how these relationships impact on the behaviour, the actions, the decisions, and the thinking of key players. So, to sum up, Michael Proctor from the outset as the lead investigator into the death of John O'Keefe, his investigation was tainted by his own bias, his connections, his relationships with the Alberts through his sister Courtney, but also his relationship with Kevin Albert, which will become apparent. They worked as colleagues and they were involved on a case together, so there's definitely conflict there. And also his relationship with his own friends, many of whom were his high school friends, that on the day, within hours of being assigned as lead investigator, Michael Proctor is sending chat messages. He is texting, he's messaging with his sister, Courtney, as well as his friends, all about John O'Keefe's death and the investigation. And again, if there were any law enforcement officers watching this, and I have spoken with a member of my family who has retired from the police, you do not share information. You do not. As an example, there was an incident here where I lived. This is a number of years ago. I was about to leave my property, and as I left my property, I saw that the property opposite me, I live in the country, so these are large properties with many, many acres. The property across the road from us, it's a large farm. The police were conducting some sort of investigation for whatever reason. There were a lot of unmarked police vehicles, there were marked police vehicles, there was a command unit, all parked on the grass opposite my property. And I sent foolishly, I sent my brother a text saying, what the heck is going on? There's a police investigation across the road from me. And he said, sorry, can't tell you. And he wouldn't tell me to this day. The case, as I understand, has already been investigated and it's before the courts. But he would not share that information with me. He would not give any information, whether he knew it or not, or sought the information himself. So for Michael Proctor, on the day of his assignment to investigate this case, to be sharing information, detailed information about his investigation with his friends who had nothing to do with this case, were not police officers, but also with his sister, from the outset, just shows how biased this was. His relationships with people coloured his approach, coloured his thinking. He hearing what Jen McCabe had to say immediately went into protection mode for the Brian Albert, as a fellow Boston police officer, and was, and as has been said, determined to pin it on the girl, to pin it on Karen Reid. And so far, thankfully, that has been unsuccessful. 2 criminal trials failed. 2 prosecutors failed. And to date, at this time, there are civil actions, wrongful death actions taken by John's brother Paul and others. There are cases against Karen Reid taken by Jen McCabe and the Alberts for defamation of character, etc. And then Karen Reid herself has taken action against the Boston Police Department for their role in the investigation and their role in hiring the likes of Michael Proctor and others, and lack of supervision of Michael Proctor and others, and also she's taken action against, as part of this, against the Alberts for falsely accusing her of causing the death of John O'Keefe. So in these videos, I am constantly reminding myself this is not just about Karen Reid, Jen McCabe, Brian Albert, or Michael Proctor. This is about a police officer, John O'Keefe, who, from everything that appears to be there, was a very nice man. He had his faults. He wasn't always the best boyfriend. I'm sure he wasn't always the best uncle. But certainly did not deserve to die in the manner that he did. And there are left questions as to why others were not investigated. Why was Brian Albert not investigated? Nicole Albert, Colin Albert, Brian Higgins, Jen McCabe, Matt McCabe, all present at the time John O'Keefe's death. I appreciate the standard is not guilty until proven otherwise, but Karen Reid was not afforded that. She was treated as guilty from the outset. She was treated as guilty, accused of guilty by Jen, by Matt, Brian, Nicole, Chris, Julie, Colin, Brian Higgins, and alarmingly, from the outset, within hours, Michael Proctor. I'll leave it there and look into this again some more. Hopefully you find this informative. As a psychologist, I want to look at some of those behaviours and bring in some psychological theory that may help to unpack this. But at the moment, just laying that foundation and setting out for the web of relationships. Okay. See you for now. Ka kite.